I discovered my spouse had a secret bank account. I never imagined those words would define a chapter of my life, a revelation that would shatter my sense of trust, security, and the very foundation of the marriage I thought I knew so well. It started with an ordinary Thursday morning. The sunlight was streaming through our bedroom window, casting warm streaks across the floor, birds chirping outside, and a faint aroma of coffee lingering in the air. I had a strange premonition that day, though I couldn't have articulated it at the time. I was sorting through some mail while my spouse, Alex, was in the shower, humming an oddly casual tune, completely unaware of the storm about to unfold. That's when I noticed an unfamiliar statement slipped in with the stack of envelopes, an electronic notice from a bank I had never heard of. My brow furrowed as I held it, thinking perhaps it was a mistake, a misdirected piece of mail. But the account number, the name, the details, it was all real, and it bore Alex's name. My heart started pounding, a sudden tightness gripping my chest as suspicion and disbelief collided. I waited, frozen, as if the universe had paused around me, and then the logical questions began to form, spiraling rapidly in my mind. Why had Alex never mentioned this account? What was in it? Was this money meant to hide something from me? And most frightening of all, what else was hidden? I spent that morning in a haze, my hands trembling slightly as I navigated the banking website, finding confirmation that the account was active, fully funded, and, most alarmingly, completely untraceable to me. All of our joint finances, bills, and shared expenses were meticulously accounted for in other accounts. But this one, this secret, remained invisible until now. Confronting the reality of secrecy in a marriage is like standing on the edge of a precipice, the ground beneath you suddenly shifting, and knowing that the person you trusted might have been deliberately concealing a part of their life. I couldn't move immediately. I kept the statement in my hands, staring at it as if it were a foreign object, and tried to make sense of what I was feeling. Anger, betrayal, disbelief, sadness, all of it intertwined, knotted into something raw and consuming. When Alex emerged from the shower, unaware of my discovery, I confronted them cautiously at first, my voice low but shaking. "Alex, I found something. There's a bank account in your name I never knew about." Their expression flickered, a brief flash of panic that they quickly masked with casual calm. "Oh, that. It's just, a savings account from before we met. I didn't think it mattered." I wanted to believe them. I wanted to trust that this explanation sufficed. But the unease in my gut wouldn't allow it. Something about the timing, the secrecy, the way the statement arrived unnoticed, all of it screamed of deception. I pressed further, the edge in my voice sharpened by months of intuition and subtle warning signs I had ignored. "Before we met or after? Because this account has had recent activity, deposits, and withdrawals, Alex. That's not before we met. That's now. That's while we've been married." The sudden tension in the room was palpable. Alex's face went pale, eyes darting briefly, hands tightening on the towel wrapped around their waist. I thought I was just keeping it separate, for emergencies, just in case, they stammered, their words tripping over themselves. I felt a surge of frustration and betrayal. Marriage, for me, was supposed to be a partnership built on transparency. Bills were split, decisions were shared, financial plans were discussed in detail. And yet, here was a hidden account, active, funded, and kept secret. The discovery sparked a torrent of questions that I could not ignore. I demanded to know the full history of the account, all transactions, all reasons for secrecy. Alex grew defensive, initially brushing off my inquiries with vague answers, claiming it was insurance, personal discretion, or just in case. But the more I pressed, the more their demeanor shifted. There was tension, avoidance, and a subtle undercurrent of fear. Fear that the truth of the account its purpose, or perhaps the amounts involved, would now be revealed. I took matters into my own hands, meticulously going through records, piecing together deposits and withdrawals. It was overwhelming. Hours spent staring at numbers, balances, and dates, trying to make sense of a hidden narrative of our life that I had been excluded from. Every entry told a story, hinted at intentions, revealed a pattern. It was not just an account. It was a secret parallel life, one that undermined the trust that I had believed was inviolable. As days passed, the emotional weight became unbearable. I found myself pacing the apartment, unable to focus on work or normal routines. The sense of betrayal gnawed at me relentlessly, a quiet but persistent ache that refused to be soothed by excuses or partial explanations. Friends and family noticed the change. Late-night calls with my closest friends became lifelines. "You're not imagining this," my best friend said, voice steady over the phone. "Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. You deserve transparency." Their words were a balm, and a confirmation of the unease that had been growing within me. Confrontations with Alex became more frequent, more intense. I demanded honesty, accountability, and clarity. The evasions, half-truths, and rationalizations only fueled my frustration. I felt like I was navigating a minefield. One misstep could escalate into full-blown conflict. Yet I refused to back down. The secrecy of the bank account was not merely a financial matter. It had evolved into a moral and emotional confrontation, forcing us both to face the realities of our marriage, the assumptions we had made, and the trust that had been eroded. At one point, I discovered a series of withdrawals that were inconsistent with the explanations given. My hands shook as I highlighted each entry, preparing to confront Alex with facts, not suspicion. I needed concrete evidence to avoid being dismissed, to ensure the discussion could not devolve into denial or manipulation. The confrontation was explosive. I remember the exact moment. Standing in the kitchen, the statement spread across the counter, light filtering in from the window, Alex standing rigid across from me. "I know about the withdrawals," I said, voice trembling but controlled. "This isn't just an emergency fund. This is money you've been hiding, money you've been using without discussing with me. Why?" There was silence at first, thick and suffocating, then a flurry of defensive explanations, attempts at justification, and emotional appeals. I listened, my mind racing, cataloging every word, every hesitation, every inconsistency. My heart ached, not just for the money or the deception, but for the realization that the foundation of my marriage had been compromised. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed beside Alex, I felt a cold distance, an invisible chasm that had opened between us. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every hidden transaction, every subtle sign I had dismissed in the past. How could someone I loved and trusted maintain such a secret? What else might be hidden? Over the following weeks, I resolved to seek clarity and regain control. I consulted financial advisors, legal experts, and even considered counseling for both myself and Alex. The questions weren't just about money. They were about integrity, accountability, and the very principles that govern a committed relationship. Each step I took was deliberate, calculated, a mixture of self-preservation and moral inquiry. I demanded full transparency, all bank statements, explanations for every deposit and withdrawal. Alex's initial defensiveness gradually gave way to reluctant disclosure. I learned the account had been used sporadically for personal spending, occasional investments, and a few unexplained transfers that left me feeling uneasy. The revelation forced a confrontation with uncomfortable truths. We had not been fully honest with each other. We had made assumptions about trust, and we had allowed secrecy to erode intimacy. As I processed this information, I also reflected on my own responses, my expectations, and the boundaries I needed to establish moving forward. The experience became a crucible, testing not just my capacity for forgiveness, but also my clarity of judgment, moral compass, and emotional resilience. And in that reflection, I realized a profound truth. Trust is not merely about shared finances or transparency in material matters. It is about mutual respect, honesty, and the courage to confront uncomfortable realities together. Discovering. The secret bank account had been a shock. Yes, but it also became an awakening, a chance to reevaluate the foundations of the marriage, my expectations, and the principles that would guide me in life. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with difficult conversations, emotional turbulence, and the challenge of reconciling love with betrayal. Yet, even in that uncertainty, I felt a renewed sense of agency, a recognition that I could navigate the storm with clarity, courage, and integrity. And as I stared at the statement one last time, the numbers and balances no longer representing mystery but a truth I now held firmly in my hands, I understood that this was more than a financial revelation. It was a lesson in trust, self-respect, and the profound importance of transparency in the relationships we hold most dear. After the initial shock of discovering the secret bank account, life didn't settle into calm. It intensified. Every interaction with Alex became a minefield, each conversation charged with unspoken tension. I felt like I was living in a parallel world where the person I had married and trusted was both familiar and unknowable, their intentions hidden behind a veil of secrecy that I could no longer ignore. Mornings were the worst. I would wake, heart racing, anticipating what new discovery might lurk in our shared life. Emails, texts, even receipts became potential clues, fragments of a puzzle I hadn't asked to assemble, but was now compelled to solve. I began to document everything meticulously: bank statements, conversations, dates, and financial anomalies. Every interaction with Alex was noted, not out of paranoia, but necessity. I needed a record, a factual anchor in the emotional storm that threatened to engulf me. One evening, while Alex was at work, I sat at our kitchen table, laptop open, and began cross-referencing the transactions from the secret account with our joint accounts. What I found made my stomach twist. There were withdrawals labeled ambiguously, amounts transferred to unnamed recipients, and patterns that didn't align with any shared expenses we had agreed upon. The sense of betrayal deepened with every click. I realized that the account wasn't just a hidden savings, it was a separate life, one that Alex had carefully compartmentalized, deliberately excluding me from the full picture. When Alex returned home, I confronted them again, this time armed not just with suspicion, but with evidence. These transfers, who were they for? Why wasn't I told? My voice trembled, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and hurt. Alex's reaction was immediate defensiveness. "It's none of your business. I handle some things privately. I didn't think it was necessary to share every single detail with you." The coldness in that statement cut deeper than any financial loss. It wasn't just about the money. It was about control, secrecy, and a fundamental disregard for our partnership. I refused to let it go. I demanded full transparency, insisting on access to the account and explanations for every transaction. The confrontation escalated into a shouting match, voices echoing through the apartment, neighbors probably wondering what horrors were unfolding behind closed doors. Alex accused me of overreacting, of not trusting them, of making mountains out of molehills. I countered that trust is built on honesty, not selective disclosure, and that hiding an active, fully funded account while presenting the illusion of full transparency was a profound betrayal. Sleep became elusive. I lay awake at night, replaying every conversation, every evasive answer, every subtle lie. My mind refused to rest, caught in a relentless loop of analysis and speculation. I began to notice the ways in which I had unconsciously ignored red flags over the years. The small inconsistencies, the casual deflections, the subtle withholding of information that now seemed glaringly obvious. The realization was both infuriating and empowering. I couldn't change the past, but I could take control of the present. I sought advice from a trusted financial advisor, someone who could guide me in understanding the implications of the secret account. We discussed legal options, potential scenarios, and strategies for ensuring that my financial security was protected. It was overwhelming, a mix of fear and determination. Every scenario I considered seemed fraught with ethical and emotional complexity. I wanted to confront Alex without destroying the remnants of our relationship, but I also needed to assert boundaries and protect myself from further deceit. The stress began to manifest physically. Tension headaches, insomnia, and an almost constant feeling of dread became daily companions. I realized that this was no longer just a financial issue. It had infiltrated every corner of my life, challenging my emotional resilience, my moral judgment, and my sense of self. Friends became my anchor. I confided in my closest circle, sharing the details I had uncovered and the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. Their support was invaluable, grounding me when I felt unmoored by the deceit and uncertainty. "You deserve honesty," one friend said, voice firm. "You have every right to know what's happening with your own life and finances. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Their words resonated, reinforcing my determination to face the situation head-on, no matter how difficult the confrontation might become. One particularly tense evening, I decided to take a more investigative approach. I accessed records, traced transaction paths, and began to piece together a timeline of Alex's financial behavior. The picture that emerged was more troubling than I had anticipated. The account had been used not only for personal spending, but also for activities that Alex had denied involvement in, transfers to entities that were vague and unexplained, and withdrawals that coincided with periods of secrecy or avoidance in our conversations. I felt a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief. How could someone I loved and trusted live such a parallel life, with such deliberate concealment? The confrontation that followed was explosive. I presented the evidence point by point, refusing to allow vague excuses or rationalizations. Alex reacted with shock, defensiveness, and finally, a reluctant admission. Some of the funds had been intended for personal investments, others for obligations they hadn't wanted to discuss, and a few transfers they still could not fully explain. The lack of transparency was undeniable, and the impact on our relationship was profound. The days that followed were emotionally taxing. We attempted mediated discussions, trying to navigate the breach of trust and the fallout of deception. Yet every conversation seemed to reopen old wounds. Every attempt at reconciliation met with reminders of the betrayal that had brought us to this point. I realized that the secret account was not just a financial issue. It was a symbol of a deeper problem in our marriage, a manifestation of avoidance, secrecy, and a lack of mutual respect that could not be ignored. Counseling was considered, but even those sessions were fraught with tension. Alex's justifications often clashed with my insistence on transparency, and the emotional strain was palpable. I found myself questioning not only their honesty, but also the foundation of our relationship itself. Could trust be rebuilt after such a deliberate and sustained act of concealment? The thought haunted me during quiet moments. Alone in the apartment, walking through the city streets, or sitting in bed staring at the ceiling, I felt the full weight of betrayal pressing down. The realization that love, commitment, and shared life were now complicated by deceit and secrecy. Yet, amidst the turmoil, I discovered an unexpected strength within myself. I could endure confrontation, maintain clarity of thought under emotional duress, and insist upon boundaries that were necessary for my own well-being. I became more attuned to my own moral compass, understanding what I could tolerate, what I could forgive, and what I could not. The secret bank account, in all its hidden complexity, became a crucible for personal growth. I documented everything, not for vengeance, but for clarity and protection. I learned to navigate emotional manipulation, demand accountability, and assert my rights in a context that was both legal and moral. I also began to reflect on the nature of trust itself, how easily it can be eroded, how essential transparency is, and how important it is to confront uncomfortable truths rather than ignoring subtle warning signs. Weeks turned into months, and the intensity of confrontation gradually gave way to a more measured approach. I established clear expectations regarding financial transparency, communication, and mutual decision-making. While the emotional wounds remained, I began to regain a sense of equilibrium, understanding that vigilance, clarity, and moral courage were essential in navigating both personal relationships and financial security. Looking back on this period, I realized that discovering the secret account was both devastating and enlightening. It forced me to confront betrayal, deception, and the fragility of trust, while also revealing the depth of my own resilience, clarity, and moral strength. I understood that true partnership requires openness, accountability, and mutual respect, and that boundaries must be maintained to protect both emotional and financial well-being. Even now, the memory of that day, the statement, the confrontation, the sleepless nights, remains vivid. It serves as a reminder that transparency is not optional, that trust is fragile, and that the courage to confront uncomfortable truths is essential for preserving one's integrity. And as I move forward, I carry with me the lessons learned, the importance of vigilance, the value of honesty, and the unwavering necessity of standing firm in the face of betrayal, no matter how painful the truth may be. The tension in our apartment had become almost unbearable by the time part 3 of this saga truly took hold. Every glance between Alex and me was loaded with suspicion, every word weighed down by unspoken accusations, and every casual moment carried the thread of another revelation. The secret bank account had not only unearthed a financial deception, but had also awakened a torrent of emotional instability that neither of us had anticipated. I had begun to notice patterns in Alex's behavior that I hadn't recognized before. Furtive glances at phones, sudden defensiveness when I asked questions, and vague references to personal matters that seemed to exclude me entirely. It became impossible to ignore that the secrecy wasn't confined to money alone. It had seeped into the very fabric of our relationship. Late one night, after weeks of anxiety, sleeplessness, and tension, I found myself sitting at the dining table, the account statement spread before me like a map of betrayal. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the overhead lamp, and I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I had been operating in a state of constant vigilance for so long that I no longer knew how to relax, how to trust, how to simply exist without anticipating the next lie. I called Alex into the kitchen, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to have a serious conversation. Not just about this account, but about us, about everything. Alex's face paled slightly, and I saw that familiar flicker of defensiveness. I thought we'd already talked about it, they said, attempting casual nonchalance. There's nothing more to say. But I refused to allow this brush off. I needed answers. I needed accountability. I needed the truth. There is everything. More to say, I countered, my tone firm, resonant with the resolve I had cultivated over the past weeks. This account is just the tip of the iceberg. We've been living in a bubble of half-truths and omissions, and I can't ignore it any longer. If we are going to move forward, you need to be honest, completely honest. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer. No excuses, no rationalizations, no vague explanations. The air between us thickened, charged with tension, and I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down. Alex hesitated, then sighed, running a hand through their hair in frustration. Fine, they muttered. I'll explain everything. What followed was a harrowing recounting of financial decisions, emotional rationalizations, and personal secrets that I had not anticipated. The account had been used for sporadic personal spending, some investments Alex had pursued secretly, and a few transactions that were still difficult for them to justify. With each revelation, I felt a mix of anger, relief, and incredulity. Some explanations were reasonable, some plausible, and others disturbing in their opacity. I listened carefully, taking mental notes, weighing the words against the facts I had already gathered. It was a painstaking exercise in patience, a mental tug-of-war between empathy and indignation. The revelation of the secret account had, in essence, become a mirror, reflecting not only Alex's choices, but also my own tolerance, my boundaries, and my sense of self. Could I forgive this breach of trust? Could I reconcile with someone who had so fundamentally altered the narrative of our marriage? Over the next several days, the emotional intensity escalated. I found myself alternating between moments of intense confrontation and periods of reflective withdrawal. My friends, once distant voices of support, became lifelines, helping me process each new piece of information and providing the reassurance I needed to maintain perspective. "You're handling this with more clarity than I could," my best friend said during one particularly long phone call. "Just remember, your boundaries are non-negotiable. You don't owe anyone access to your life or forgiveness just because they ask for it." Their words resonated deeply. I realized that my insistence on transparency was not just about money. It was about asserting my right to trust, respect, and emotional safety within a partnership. I also began to notice the subtle, corrosive effects of secrecy on our daily life. Conversations were strained, laughter became rarer, and even mundane. Tasks like grocery shopping or paying bills were overshadowed by a lingering sense of suspicion. I could see that the emotional distance between Alex and me was widening, a canyon created by months of concealment and unspoken fears. One evening, I decided that a more structured approach was necessary. I created a detailed ledger, tracking every aspect of the secret account, comparing it against our shared accounts, and highlighting areas that lacked clarity. I presented this ledger to Alex, not as an accusation, but as a framework for honest dialogue. The moment was tense. Alex took the papers from my hands, scanning each page with a mixture of apprehension and defensiveness. "I didn't realize you were keeping such meticulous records," they said, voice tinged with unease. I thought we were talking openly." "Openly?" I asked, tone sharp. "This account existed without my knowledge. Deposits, withdrawals, transfers, I had no idea. Transparency isn't just about occasional conversation. It's about access, honesty, and mutual accountability. Do you understand that?" Alex nodded slowly, eyes downcast, and for a moment, the room was filled only with the sound of our breathing. That night, I lay awake, pondering the future of our marriage. The secret bank account had revealed more than financial deception. It had unearthed layers of mistrust, avoidance, and lack of communication that I could no longer ignore. I realized that rebuilding trust would require not only complete disclosure, but also a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, both about Alex and myself. In the weeks that followed, we embarked on a rigorous process of financial and emotional transparency. We scheduled meetings to review all accounts, discussed past decisions in detail, and sought to establish clear expectations for future conduct. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and at times, painfully slow. Yet, it was also necessary. Each step forward, however small, was a step toward reclaiming a sense of partnership that had been eroded by secrecy. Despite the progress, there were moments of relapse. Old habits resurfaced, subtle evasions appeared, and I occasionally caught glimpses of the person who had kept secrets from me. Each instance required patience, reflection, and sometimes direct confrontation. I learned to balance vigilance with empathy, understanding that rebuilding trust is neither linear nor easy, but that consistency and accountability are essential. Outside the confines of our apartment, the world continued, indifferent to the turmoil within our relationship. I found solace in work, exercise, and moments of solitude, Allowing myself time to process the emotional complexity of the situation, I journaled daily, capturing not only the facts of the secret account, but also my feelings, reflections, and insights. The act of writing became a lifeline, a way to externalize the storm inside my mind and gain clarity. One afternoon, while reviewing financial documents together, Alex made a startling admission. There had been additional transactions, small amounts initially dismissed as insignificant, that actually revealed a pattern of ongoing concealment. My chest tightened, a familiar mix of anger and disappointment washing over me. Yet, this time, I approached the revelation with measured determination. I calmly insisted on complete disclosure, emphasizing the importance of total transparency for the sake of both our relationship and my own well-being. The conversation that followed was intense, stretching late into the night. Every word, every hesitation, every explanation was scrutinized. I felt the emotional weight pressing down, but I also felt a growing sense of agency. I was no longer merely reacting to Alex's actions. I was asserting control over my life, my finances, and my emotional boundaries. As weeks turned into months, the pattern of openness and accountability began to solidify. Alex's behavior gradually adjusted to the new expectations, and the frequency of evasions decreased. While the emotional scars remained, I could sense a tentative rebuilding of trust, a fragile but tangible recognition that transparency and honesty were non-negotiable foundations for our partnership. Reflection became an essential part of my daily routine. I considered the deeper implications of the secret bank account, the ways in which secrecy can corrode relationships, and the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths. I recognized the strength and resilience I had developed, the clarity of judgment I had gained, and the moral courage required to insist upon honesty, even in the face of conflict. I also acknowledged the complexity of human behavior, the impulses, fears, and rationalizations that can lead someone to conceal, deceive, or act in ways that undermine trust. Understanding these dynamics allowed me to approach the situation with a balance of assertiveness and empathy, protecting myself while also recognizing the humanity in others. The journey was far from over, and I knew that the path ahead would continue to be challenging. Yet, I also realized that the discovery of the secret account, painful as it had been, had catalyzed profound personal growth. I had learned to navigate deceit, demand accountability, and assert boundaries with clarity and confidence. And as I looked toward the future, I felt a cautious optimism, a sense that, armed with experience, resilience, and moral clarity, I could navigate whatever challenges might arise next. The final act of this chapter in my life began with a quiet morning, one that carried the weight of months of tension, confrontation, and emotional exhaustion. I sat alone at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, reflecting on the journey that had led to this point. The secret bank account, once a symbol of betrayal and deception, had forced me to confront not only Alex's actions, but also my own capacity for patience, discernment, and moral fortitude. I realized that the path forward could not simply be about restoring a sense of normalcy. It had to involve acknowledgement, accountability, and a willingness to face the hard truths that had been buried beneath layers of secrecy. When Alex entered the room, their demeanor was tentative, almost fragile. They had grown quieter over the past few months, perhaps realizing the gravity of their actions, perhaps sensing the unyielding resolve in me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, carrying both authority and weariness. Alex nodded, sitting across from me, hands clasped tightly, eyes avoiding mine. I began by summarizing the months of revelations, confrontations, and emotional turbulence. I recounted the initial discovery, the frantic nights of research, the confrontations filled with anger and hurt, and the painstaking process of piecing together the truth. Each word was measured, deliberate, an assertion of both fact and emotional reality. As I spoke, I could see the weight of guilt pressing on Alex. Their usual defenses, once quick and sharp, had dulled, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of the breach of trust. "I know I've hurt you," Alex admitted, voice low, almost a whisper. "I never intended for it to get this far. I didn't think you'd understand. Or maybe I was afraid of being judged. I thought I could handle it on my own." I felt a mixture of anger, sorrow, and a strange sense of compassion. I understood fear, secrecy, and the desire to maintain control over one's own life. Yet I also understood the deep violation that secrecy had wrought on our partnership. "It's not about judgment," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's about honesty. It's about partnership. You can't build a life together while hiding parts of it, no matter how well-intentioned you think those secrets are. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's a long, difficult road to rebuild." Over the next few hours, we talked in a way that was raw, unfiltered, and profoundly revealing. Alex shared the motivations behind the account, the fears that had led to concealment, and the moments of indecision that had allowed secrecy to fester. I shared the emotional impact, the sleepless nights, the feeling of betrayal, and the struggle to reconcile love with disappointment. For the first time in months, there was genuine mutual acknowledgement of the stakes involved, the mistakes made, and the emotional damage inflicted. The conversation was exhausting, but it was also cathartic. I realized that this was the crucible moment, where decisions about the future would either be forged or fractured. I had to decide whether this marriage could survive the weight of betrayal, and whether Alex's commitment to transparency and accountability was genuine and sustainable. The weeks that followed were marked by deliberate, intentional efforts to rebuild. We established full access to all financial accounts, created joint plans for expenses and investments, and agreed upon regular check-ins to maintain transparency. It was not easy. Old patterns of secrecy and defensiveness resurfaced occasionally, triggering moments of doubt and tension. But the commitment to honesty provided a framework for progress. I also sought personal growth outside of the relationship. Therapy became a vital tool, allowing me to process the emotional turbulence, explore boundaries, and strengthen my capacity for resilience and self-respect. I began to understand the broader lessons of this experience: the necessity of vigilance, the importance of boundaries, and the power of moral clarity in navigating complex personal and financial landscapes. One pivotal moment occurred when I discovered a minor, overlooked transaction in the account. Normally, this would have reignited suspicion and conflict, but instead, I approached it with measured calm. I presented the transaction to Alex, asking for clarification and context. The response was immediate, honest, and detailed, and I realized that the months of confrontation and dialogue had cultivated a new level of accountability and integrity. I could trust that transparency was no longer optional. It was ingrained. The journey of rebuilding was ongoing. There were still difficult days, moments when the memory of secrecy and betrayal threatened to overwhelm, and instances where old insecurities flared. But each challenge was met with clarity, communication, and the conscious application of lessons learned. I began to see the relationship not as a fragile construct threatened by deception, but as a dynamic, evolving partnership capable of growth, adaptation, and reconciliation. Reflecting on this experience, I recognized the profound impact of the secret bank account on my life. What had begun as a discovery of financial deception became a catalyst for emotional awareness, moral development, and personal empowerment. I had learned to confront uncomfortable truths, assert boundaries, demand accountability, and navigate the complex interplay of trust, love, and human imperfection. There was a sense of liberation in acknowledging that betrayal, while painful, could also serve as a powerful teacher. It forced me to examine not only Alex's choices, but my own expectations, resilience, and moral compass. I understood that relationships are not static. They are defined by the willingness of both parties to confront reality, communicate honestly, and maintain integrity even when it is difficult or uncomfortable. In the quiet moments, I often reflected on the emotional turbulence, the sleepless nights, and the relentless questioning of reality that had accompanied the discovery of the secret account. I recognized the strength it had taken to navigate the storm, the clarity it had forced me to cultivate, and the moral courage required to insist upon truth and accountability. I also acknowledged the ways in which Alex had grown, the difficult self-examination that the secrecy had compelled, and the effort required to rebuild trust and restore equilibrium. Ultimately, the experience reshaped my understanding of partnership, transparency, and trust. I realized that love alone is not enough. Integrity, honesty, and mutual respect are essential components of a sustainable, resilient relationship. The secret bank account, once a source of betrayal and anxiety, became a symbol of awakening, a reminder that vigilance, clarity, and moral courage are indispensable in navigating both personal relationships and financial matters. And as I look back now, months later, I can see the transformation that has occurred. The relationship is not perfect. Scars remain, and moments of doubt linger. But there is also a deeper understanding, a renewed commitment to honesty, and a recognition that transparency and integrity are non-negotiable foundations for partnership. The journey has been painful, exhausting, and emotionally taxing. But it has also been empowering, clarifying, and ultimately transformative. Discovering the secret bank account taught me that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, must always be confronted, that boundaries are essential, and that the courage to demand honesty and accountability is a form of self-respect and moral strength. I have emerged from this ordeal stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the dynamics of trust, deception, and integrity. And while the shadow of betrayal may never fully disappear, it no longer controls me. I understand now that transparency is the cornerstone of any meaningful relationship, and that insisting upon it is not only justified but necessary. In the end, the secret bank account was not merely a financial anomaly. It was a test, a crucible, and a revelation. It forced me to confront betrayal, assert boundaries, and navigate the turbulent waters of trust, love, and human imperfection. And in doing so, it taught me that resilience, clarity, and moral courage are not just abstract virtues. They are lifelines, guiding us through the storm and illuminating the path toward honesty, integrity, and ultimately, self-respect. I am no longer haunted by the secrecy. I am guided by the lessons it imparted, and I carry forward with a renewed sense of agency, understanding, and commitment to the principles that sustain trust, love, and partnership. Am I wrong for expecting honesty? No. And I will never settle for anything less.